Just going to get started. So welcome everyone to the Dennis Matthews Lectureship. I know Dennis doesn't like the attention, but this eponymous lectureship was really formed to really celebrate fountainheads in rehabilitation medicine like Dennis. We all know Dennis well. He has been a leader in PM&R, and particularly pediatric rehabilitation medicine. I know that one of the things that he's proud of is his service on the board of American Board of PM&R with Dr. DeLisa, and also guest editing or associate editing one of the sections in Dr. DeLisa's textbook. Dr. DeLisa as well is a fountainhead of rehabilitation medicine, and I wanted to have Dennis come up and say a few words about Dr. DeLisa before he delivers his lectureship.
Been president of the AANEM and was instituted into the Institute of Medicine and one of the few physiatrists that have ever been inducted into the Institute of Medicine. As you all know, we all read his textbook and continue to use that as a primary focus. And so it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. DeLisa, who now hails from Santa Fe, New Mexico.
Thank you very much, Dennis. Can you all hear me? Okay. I am retired, as you can see up here. It's a great thing to be. I can do what I want, when I want. I spent 25 years as department chairman in New Jersey. At the same time, I was involved with the Kessler Institute for Rehabilitation. In fact, I was recruited simultaneously by both. I was fortunate enough to get a letter from the two of them together and said, "We want to make you an offer you cannot afford to refuse." And I said, "I've never had an offer like that before, so I'm going to go look." And it worked out very well for me. I'm also a clinical professor in the Department of Orthopedics and Rehabilitation at the University of New Mexico in Albuquerque, and we have just formed a division of PM&R in neurosurgery, and the hope is that we'll become a department. There are a whopping total of 10 physiatrists in New Mexico. I decided I was going to talk about navigating the P's of academic medicine: people, politics, productivity, promotion, and leadership. I have no disclosures to make on this. I've been talking to the residents for an hour, and I talked about my background, how I got into academic medicine, and how I got into physiatry, and what I did and why I did. I'm the first person from my family to ever graduate from college, the only one that's ever gone to medical school. And I started out at Washington State University as an undergraduate, finished in 1964, then went to the University of Washington. We were there during the Vietnam War era, so we had about 60 or 70 people in our graduating class. Everyone finished in 4 years. If you didn't finish in 4 years, you got a chance to be in the military. It was amazing how everybody finished in 4 years. Then did my internship in Phoenix, Arizona, associated with the Barrows Neurological Institute. There were about 18 of us or so as residents, first year, rotating. We all applied for what was called the Berry Plan, which I'm sure none of you know about. Basically, it was an opportunity during the Vietnam War to do your residency and then go in the military. And as fate would have it, none of us got that. All of us had the opportunity to go in the military. So I was assigned to Fort Benning, Georgia, in the Army. So I decided I was not going to drive there, I'd fly there. So I flew there, and the Army gives you 300 miles per day. And so actually, since I arrived roughly the next day, I had data rank on everybody. I actually started in the military before I even finished my residency, my internship. So that the rest of my life was either good or bad for me, because if you have data rank, by definition, if you're a position in which they're looking for a leader, you become the leader. Okay. I then finished my, I shouldn't tell the story, but I will. I told it to the residents. While I was in the military for 2 years, the second year was in South Korea, basically, I applied for residency. Things were pretty loose back then. So I applied for a residency in orthopedics. I applied for one in internal medicine, the one for PM&R, got accepted in all three, and wrote at the end, near the start of those seasons, I'm not coming to any of you. So for a guy that became a BMS, that's probably sacrilegious. But I wanted to work for a year, make some more decisions, and I did that in Seattle. I then went into my residency. You know, after you've been in the military for 2 years, and after you did these kind of things, it was hard to be a resident again and to say yes when you sometimes didn't agree with what the faculty thought should be done. So that was interesting. I then, when I finished my residency, or during my residency, the issue came up, do I want to go into private practice or do I want to go into academic medicine? And, you know, there were almost no physiatrists at that time. University of Washington had a very strong department with Justice Lehman. We actually had a 2-week clerkship that was mandatory, and I really liked a guy by the name of Joe Honnett, who was a faculty member there. So I said to Justice Lehman, well, I'm not sure if I want to do this, but why don't I try some teaching? So being a smart department chairman, he told me, he said, okay, I'm going to have you teach the OT, PT, and P&O undergraduate students, bachelor's level, functional anatomy. So while I was a resident, 4 days a week for 2 quarters, I taught functional anatomy. I got an opportunity to put the slides together. I got an opportunity to do all of that, and the whole works. And I really liked that. So then I decided I will go into academic medicine, because I can always, if I don't like it, go into private practice. Once you're in private practice, it's a little harder to go back into academic medicine. And then they said, well, we have 3 different opportunities for you. One will be at the university, one will be at the VA, and one will be at the public health hospital. It was an easy decision. At the university, I would have been an instructor, because that's where we started out, with all full professors. That's not a good place to be, because basically the full professors are asking you to cover them all the time. Being the only one at the public health wasn't exactly, so I went to the VA. It was a great experience for me. I got an opportunity to do a lot there. I started out doing EMGs and ambulatory care. I then went and became the Associate Chief of Staff for Education and learned how to do all kinds of training programs and whatever, so it was a great experience. So I'm getting a lot of administrative experience during my time. And then Seattle got a new VA hospital. Now, yours is taking a little longer than ours did to complete, and they had a spinal cord injury unit. So I decided I wanted to step down for being the Associate Chief of Staff, and that did put me in the office with the director and stuff and learn a little more administration. I wanted to develop a program. So I went and headed up the SCI program. And I did that for a number of years before I got this opportunity to go to the East Coast. So I spent 12 years at the University of Washington, went actually from from an instructor to an associate professor. Then I went to New Jersey with a combination of both, ran the medical school department at PM&R, the first chair there, and I did that for 25 years. Same time, I was head of the Kessler Institute for Rehabilitation. I did that for about 20, because around that time we had changes at Kessler. We actually sold it and and it became for profit. All of that money went into a fund that had to be researched, and so really the foundation really grew, the Kessler Foundation. Kessler Foundation today is an enormously big research foundation for rehabilitation on the Kessler sites. It's independent of the Kessler Institute. When I left, we had 12 full-time PhD researchers and 3 full-time MD researchers, and it's gotten a lot bigger since then. They actually have their own MRI for research. I also served as interim dean for 6 months. Great experience. I went over in the dark side and was there for a while. I said I would never retire, but I did in June of 2012. I was 70 at that time. And my wife said, if we're ever leaving, now is the time. We do it now or never. And even though I had spent that many years on the East Coast, I could never get used to humidity. So the answer was obvious. It was time to move. So we went to Santa Fe. We've enjoyed it there, and it's been absolutely great. I'm in leadership in medicine. I'm going to talk a little bit about this. It's a need, and it's really a void. And to me, it's a tremendous void right now. I think medicine is at a crisis. I don't think the finances can keep going the way they are. And if we as physicians don't play a bigger role in this, we're going to be out. So I strongly encourage all of you to think about this and play a role in this. Leadership is a difficult topic to define, teach, and to really evaluate. In fact, I think we do a terrible job at teaching our residents. We teach them nothing about leadership for the most part. It's ignored. I think our residency programs now that we have now are great for turning somebody out in 1985. I don't think they're great for today. I think we should be spending a lot of time in independent living facilities. I think we should pay a lot of time in other kinds of facilities than what we have. But finances don't allow us to do that. Physicians often find themselves, as I said, in leadership roles through circumstances. Mine in the military, all of a sudden, I become a commanding officer. I'm a head of a dispensary in Korea, and I'm supposed to do all of these kinds of things. I think some people are born leaders. Others have it thrust upon them. Ernie Johnson once told me a statement, quality rises to the top. It's a statement that I have wanted and I use all the time. I truly believe if you put everything and make quality the most important thing, it will rise to the top. It takes a lot of effort to do that, but I strongly encourage all of you to work on that. What is leadership? Tangible quality. Hard to define, but you know it when you see it. There's another term that's used for that too. It involves risk-taking. There's no doubt about it. You have to have the courage of your convictions. You have to take risk. If you don't take any risk and you're a leader, mediocre would be at best is what you can do. Knowing me, I'm great at growing. And you have to know yourself. I can maintain, but I don't have a lot of fun with it. I'm the wrong person to shrink. Better for me to leave than to have to shrink. And that's one of the reasons, probably at the age of 70, I decided to step down. Because it was just getting harder and harder to have to tell people that we no longer have resources to keep you. Because when I went to New Jersey, I signed 3 separate contracts. One with a medical school, one with a hospital, and one with the Kessler Institute. Every one of those were kind of like forever. But we had no additional resources in 25 years because we didn't turn over. Seattle had 3 chairs during the time that I had there for 25 years. Seattle got 3 different influxes of resources. You need that to keep going. Now, you have a nice system here where your departments get looked at every so many years. I think it's 7. And once again, if the dean wants to and has the resources, he or she can provide them for the department to grow. Our place, we supposedly had that, but if you were doing okay, they didn't even have anybody come and look at you because they didn't want to have to give you any resources. So it became very difficult on resources to do that. Also, everything changes all the time. Nowadays, instead of having those positions that I got and was given by the medical school that were theoretically there for life, oftentimes the dean will say, I'll give you these for X number of years, and after that they're gone. So you have to learn how the institute works and that things will change over time. I think you have to be able to do many things at the same time. Lots of people like to develop plans, 5-year plan, 3-year plan, 2-year plan, whatever. I hate plans. Now, I will develop them, but I may never use them. Or I will develop them because I think it's good for the faculty to put, I shouldn't say this, put all these things together. But if something came up that we really would be good for us, it could be moved up to number 1 in a heartbeat. So I think you needed the flexibility of doing that so that you could take advantage of things. Because I think it's really hard to decide what's going to be there 5 years from now or what kind of crisis come up during that period of time. So you have to deal with change. Oftentimes it's unanticipated, it's unplanned, and sometimes it's really shocking, but you have to be able to deal with that. I do strongly believe that leadership and learning are very much linked. I'm going to say 5 fundamentals of physician leadership. I think it's an inward journey of self-development and self-discovery. You'll learn a lot about yourself during this. One of the things I learned is I'm absolutely a morning person. My best times of getting things done is the morning. I used to go into work early before most people showed up, and the first hour and a half I got more done than I did the rest of the day. In the evenings, I can do manual work and stuff like that I need to get done, but it's certainly not good for creative thinking. And somehow, and I guess I was lucky in this, when I went to sleep, my mind kept working on the issues. So when I get up in the morning, I had ideas of what I wanted to do, clarity of what I wanted to do, and during the shower I could sort of get them down and go into work and do it that way. I think you need values. I think the department needs values. It needs to have goals. Communication, I think, is a key to everything. I don't think, no matter who you are, how much you communicate, everyone will say you don't communicate enough. One of the things I did is I had a faculty meeting every month. Essentially the same time, same day and same time. Now, I knew a lot of faculty couldn't come. And I didn't use telecommunication. I just wrote up a lot of minutes, posted them all, and when people would ask me questions about it, I said, obviously you didn't read your minutes, did you? Be amazed that after you do that a couple times that people start reading their minutes to see what you've done. I also allowed faculty members to help set the agenda. So if they had issues that they really thought were important, they could be on the agenda. I think accountability, and we'll talk more about this later, is a key to making your place work. We tried to evaluate anything and everything. We'll give you some examples later. And we would try to develop a lot of leaders. In fact, I have said that my legacy, if any, of my time, my 25 years there, was a textbook and those people I trained and what they've done with their careers. And as I talked to the House staff earlier, I said, I always wanted to do this study of how I rank people when they came in and how I ranked them when they left. And there's not an equal correlation, to say the least. Skills and characteristics of physician leaders. Well, you certainly need to collaborate and you need to cooperate. Because in this day and age, it's hard to be independent, and you don't want to be independent. You want to really work with the other departments around you. You want them to be your advocate. Because I will tell you in this day and age, and having been a dean for 6 months, sometimes it's easier to collapse departments into divisions. Because it's expensive to have departments. And that's why maybe, if you look across the country, there are a lot of medical schools without a department of PM&R. I think the next thing is develop listening skills. It's, when you talk or whatever, it's not just the words, it's really what the message is being conveyed. I have to admit, I'm not the best listener in the world. I have to admit that some people bringing me the same thing for the 18th time which is their personal agenda, was not high on my list to listen to. Once again, we've already talked about communication skills. I think you can't be arrogant. And I think you have to admit when you make mistakes. And that sometimes is hard to do. You also, I think, have to have people around you that can tell you when you're wrong. Tell you the answer to this is no, not yes. You have everybody around you that says yes, you're in trouble. Now, the ones that tell you no on everything get to be a real pain in the neck in other places. But that does happen. You need the thoughts of others. When I moved there, the residency program at Kessler and the medical school was on terminal probation, and it was just terrible. And everybody said I would install the University of Washington program, but we didn't. We had a lot of people from a lot of good programs, and we sort of sat down and put our program together the way we wanted it, the way it fit our schedule. We had the most structured training program of PM&R on the East Coast, period. So if you wanted to come into our program, you like structure, you were in good shape. If you didn't like structure, it was a bad place to be. And if you thought you could come in and change me, you were wrong. So basically the structure was what was one of our strongest points. We had mandatory didactics for the residents every Wednesday morning from 7 to noon and sometimes to 1. During that period of time, they were excused from all clinical duties. The faculty had to run it and did run it. And if I heard that when the residents got back, they had to catch up on everything, I was not a happy camper. So we really protected that time for the house staff. We also had a modular curriculum. It was 18 months, repeated twice. And after each block, we had an exam. And we did look at how you did on the exam. We expected you to study. We expected you to, in all honesty, continually study throughout. And we were fortunate enough that all the time I was there, and we had about 250 between residents, postdocs, and clinical fellows go through the program. Only one person ever failed the American Board of PM&R on first try, on part 1. And that person, as I told them before, was a gift to us from the Army in which they asked us to take, insisted we take, and we didn't have to pay for it. And she really got me. The residents were always afraid that the first person that failed, I would make them infamous. So nobody failed. On to the next one. We'll talk more about mentoring. Skills and characteristics of physicians some more. I think the top one is a really important one. It's the life balance issue, professional and personal. I think it's becoming more and more and more of an issue now than what it was before. I mean, when I started as a physician and when I started on the faculty, we just worked all the time. I think I worked 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. That doesn't happen anymore. And maybe it shouldn't happen at all during this period of time. On the other hand, people that would drive me nuts is when they had timelines and they knew them and they didn't deliver. Kind of a real pain for everybody when that happens. I also had a person who's very big in the field, whose name I won't mention, who no matter if you gave him 1 day or 365, would give it to you 2 minutes before it was due. He had to definitely work under pressure. And even to this day, he does the same thing. I talked about integrity and loyalty. But the other thing is, you know, it's easy to be very close to your faculty. But as a chair, you can't be too close. Because sometimes you have to fire people. And sometimes you have to say, we think it's time for you to move on. There's a very tough balance there. But you have to do it. And you have to feel comfortable with it. I also think you need to be able to multitask, do many things at the same time. Lots of people can't do that. I also said to myself, I'm going to not touch a sheet of paper more than once. That didn't work, but it's a good thought. For the most part, it did work. And I would get lots of things done that way. Otherwise, once again, your time and how you prioritize it becomes a problem. If you're a department chair And if you're a dean, there's a lot of pressure. And pressure goes more when finances are a problem or when you can no longer have growth. I came here a long time ago, and I visited when Pat Maloney was the department chair, in a whole different place and whatever. And to say the least, you have come a very, very long ways, and I think that's a compliment to Dennis and all the things he's done here. I think it's a compliment to the fact that he's so integrated within your systems. They trust him so much, and they give him resources for it. So I think he's done an amazing job for you. He's only served as a chair for 20 years, so he's got 5 more. I got 5 more years on him. On the other hand, he's been here, I think, 32. So, whatever. And so, you know, that's really good. That's amazing. That just shows the continuity of the person and whatever. And he's been recognized for so many things. He gave the Zyder Lecture. He got the Academy's Distinguished Award. He was on the American Board of PM&R. He was a chair of the American Board of PM&R. Just shows how respected he is and all the kinds of things he's done. I think a chair or a dean has to have a lot of endurance. Because once you solve one problem, there's usually another one there, or opportunity. And you have to decide how much of that you want to do during your period of time. And it does come a time, which is time to get new ideas and fresh ideas in the process. I think past success is a really good indicator for future production. And I really do mean that when you look at things. And you try to recruit people. Now, the next thing seems to be out of whack here, but it's called happy emails. I don't send email unless I consider it neutral or happy. That doesn't mean I don't write some nasty emails, but I get rid of those. It gives me a chance to get out of my system. But I don't think you want those showing up all the time in places where you don't want. 5 traits that make physicians effective leaders. 1, historically, because our interaction with staff and patients, they look up to us as leaders. We have to make a lot of diagnosis. A lot of complexity is there. So the complexity of medicine makes you look at the complexity of leadership. We have a knack for problem solving. That's what we do. We are involved with consultations and whatever, so we know how to leverage expertise. I think the next one's the most important. We better damn well do this if we want to be relevant, because I think the system's going to change. And if we don't have a big part in that, we're going to be left out. There's way too much money on the table. Too many private interests, too many conflicts of interest. I asked the residents, I said, essentially, how much money do you think is in GME in this country? $50 billion. $50 billion industry. And what does medicine say? Well, we've created a lot more medical schools. We got a lot, we expanded them. We need lots more resident slots. 50 billion is not enough. I think it's a big problem. I think it's going to blow up. But we'll see. Why are we bad leaders? Well, part of it is the fact that we give orders and they're supposed to obey. Kind of the whole leadership style. Is it command and control, top down? Or what is your leadership style? How many of you have had leadership training during your residency? Raise your hands. Not many hands went up. I think it's a huge mistake we make. And we all say, you know, those people in the hospital and stuff, they're nothing but pencil pushers. They just cause us trouble. They're not helpful. How do you develop leadership skills? Well, as I told the residents, one of the things that really helped me the most was when I was my last year of residency and then my first few years as a faculty member, I went to every AAP meeting. And I got a chance to be on committees because they didn't have many people on committees. So I got a chance to see the leaders of our field and to model what I liked about them and not use what I didn't like about them. How did they handle a meeting? Well, how did they fix agendas? How did they summarize things, etc.? How did they pretty much think? How did they rationalize things? So I picked things that I like from people and use that as my mentoring and my modeling. Well, I think you can still do that. That's still a very small meeting in which you can grab a hold of people and talk to them and ask them for advice. You could have a mentor within your program. The problem with a research mentor or other mentors in a program is that I think they can only handle about 2 or 3 people. So if you got 8 residents that want the same mentor, that might not work out too well in the program. You can attend courses and workshops, and I've got books and articles here in the next slides on different books and stuff. I'm not going to spend any time on that. Chief residents in most places get an opportunity to really test their leadership skills, and oftentimes they can go to courses on being leaders and such. Quality improvement projects can help you a lot for being leaders, unless you just do them and have them as meaningless. Then they just become work, and they don't really show much of anything. I've talked to my residents, about developing a management portfolio. What have you accomplished? What do you need? What do you have there? How to set it up, etc. We have educational portfolios all over the place. Why not a management portfolio that you can set up? Something you can think about, maybe want to do. Those are just some of the books. Now, to be part of an effective leadership, we must move from individual to system thinking. I was lucky that when I was in the military, I was getting ready to go over, finishing my first 6 months at Fort Benning, that I got sent for basic training. At the end of that basic training, I was supposed to go to Vietnam. They called me and they said, "You want to go to Vietnam as a general medical officer or preventive medicine officer?" I said, probably the dumbest question I've ever heard. What do I have to learn to be a preventive medicine officer? So they taught me for 2.5 months preventive medicine, thinking the big picture or whatever. It's helped me the rest of my life. Not to just focus on the little things, but to focus on the bigger picture. And that's been a great thing for me. I'm going to talk now with respect to dean and department chairman, understanding policy, politics, and economics. Now, when I became the dean, they told me 2 things that were true. In the morning, you're going to be asked or demanded by some of your faculty for resources in ways that you can't even imagine. So I learned a lot about that from what other people asked me. Threatening to quit, leave, do everything. In the afternoon, they'd say, "You don't want to hear this, but you must know this." Those were the worst ones. Usually on Friday afternoon, there'd be a knock, and you can't believe the problems that people got themselves into. And I'd say, wow. The other thing, though, that was good, because especially when people asked for things, the senior associate dean there had great files. So he knew the last time Dr. Matthews came in and demanded salary or money or whatever, and he had it all written out for me. So I knew exactly where he was on everything. But at the end, when I no longer was department chairman, I had to go back, no longer dean, had to go back and be department chairman. I knew the salary of all my fellow chairs. Not only their base salary, but also what they got from the practice plan. A very interesting piece of data. Chairs. Chairs are expected to do 4 things, at least 4. Administrator, educator, clinician, researcher. How many people do you know that are great at all of those? Not too many. I think the issue here is if you're not good at one of these, make sure you get resources to help you. One of the things I did is they had to give me a full funded position, by the way, of a full-time research director. So you go out and get it. Now you got to remember way back when, 25 years ago, how many physiatrists did we have that were really good at research, that wanted to be a research director? Not many. So and you have to work through those kinds of things. So I think you need to know your strengths, know your weaknesses, and know what you have to have. When I first went to that system, I had 3 administrators in my contracts. 1 for Kessler, 1 for the hospital, and 1 for the medical school. And over time, I changed all of those people. Because initially when I got there, I wanted people within those systems, because I didn't know how the systems really worked. Over time, once you learn how they work, you might decide that you want somebody that's more creative, more ambitious, more these kinds of things. So look at the pluses and minuses of those things. Because every institution has formal ways of doing things and informal ways of doing things. I was fortunate that I found a department chair who happened to be a psychiatrist, who we became very good friends. So he would tell me all kinds of things about how the system worked, how it didn't work, etc. And there was really no competition to our areas. So it worked out very well with that. I also had a rule. Every major committee, in fact, every committee in the medical school, every committee in the university hospital, one of my faculty members had to be on. We had to be seen. We had to be interactive. Everybody had to feel that PM&R was important. And minutes came out of all those committees, and I actually looked at them. Really, all I cared about was whether you were there. If you were never there, that was not good for you. Okay? I even served on this. I was on the Student Affairs Committee. Great educational, only chair, great educational process to see what's happening within your school. With respect to educator, I think you really need to decide how you want to be involved in that medical school curriculum, because medical schools are made for medical students, not for residents. So we were involved in every opportunity with medical students. The first opportunity the medical students ever had to see a clinician was in anatomy, and we taught functional anatomy, clinical correlations. We taught the musculoskeletal course with orthopedics. If anybody offered any curriculum time, we took it. But then I had a big faculty. By the time I was done, I had 100 and some people. Now, a lot of clinicians would come up and say, you know, insurance companies want me to have a clinical faculty appointment in order to da-da-da-da-da. I'd say, you want that? Here's what you have to do for me. You didn't do it. You didn't get it. If you said you were going to do it and you didn't do it, I took it away. Okay? So you'd be surprised how that works, give and take in the whole way you do things. But I think it's really important in that way to be involved in the medical school, to be thought of all the time, and with the medical students. The one thing I got in my recruitment packet from medical school you probably never get again, I got a 2-week mandatory clerkship. To this day, New Jersey medical students spend 2 weeks in PM&R. Now, I didn't want them all to be physiatrists, but I wanted them to know what we could do for their patients, and they do. We also, even this year, 11 of those students out of about 200 went into PM&R. We're the second largest medical school as far as people going into PM&R. One time, though, I took 0 of ours, and the dean was not happy. Communication, as I've talked about before, verbal, written, and listening. Next one is probably the key, finances and budget. You have to understand finances. And if you don't, you better have up there a very good person who's your administrative assistant with a medical school and with a hospital and whatever to help you with this. The better you understand finances, the better off you're going to be. Now, it's a tricky thing. Because for the medical school, when I wanted things, the dean had access to all my control points. He knew what I had. So if I had pretty good finances, he would look at me and say, no. If I had no finances, he'd say, what are you doing? You know, what's wrong with you? But that's a key. Faculty. Here's another thing. Chairs responsible for the developing of their faculty. How do you develop your faculty? Well, when I first got there, I had a lot of positions. The only way I could develop my faculty for the most part was because I had a lot of schools in New York, and they were pretty much saturated with their faculty positions. So their best residents coming out, I could try to grab and bring on the faculty with a position. So this one I wanted for spinal cord injury, this one for head injury, etc. So that's one. Poach is an interesting word. I'm going to come to Denver. I want a pediatric physiatrist. I'm going to buy this one. Okay? Bring she back, we'll say this time. And we're going to set up our program, because probably one of the most difficult things to find are pediatric physiatrists. Now, I was lucky that I had 300 adult rehab beds in Kessler, and I had access to Children's Specialized Hospital, which had all the pediatric beds. So I had a lot of clinical material, to say the least, in our programs. But you have to decide how you do that. And then you have to decide, once you do this, do they deliver or not deliver in the process? So recruiting, and then also looking at the whole issue of retention, compensation, how everything stacks up. And I will tell you that these things keep changing all the time, because more and more the deans want more money, the department chairman wants more money, this one wants more money, and out of the pot. But that's part of what it is all about. You can develop whatever patient care programs you think are important in your areas and that you need. We at Seattle, when I left, essentially was not into musculoskeletal and sports medicine. When Walter Stoloff was chair there, he ignored it, which was great for me, recruiting against him. Then they had a couple guys come, and they got into this, and now they have a very strong department in these areas, in fact, one of the strongest in the country. So they went from a weakness in their program to a strength in their program just by the fact that Larry Robinson and some of those became chairs with different priorities and different interests. Education and training programs. Once again, how much do you want to get involved with medical students? How much do you want to get involved with residents? How many do you want? Do you want to have clinical fellows, and if so, in what areas? And do you want to have CME programs? We set up a board review course on the East Coast that was really good for the faculty. It gave them tremendous confidence that they didn't have. And over time, we developed the largest board review course in the country. A little problem for me since I was the head of the board, but I didn't teach it. So I used that as my ability to get around it. Research program, once again, how do you develop it? What are your expectations? How much time do you give someone for research? What do you expect in the way of productivity out of them? We have a resident research course every year. That's set up really so the residents can evaluate the literature more than anything else. A lot of things, and we give them an exam at the end. We take an article published by one of our elite journals and have them evaluate it, and usually there's something drastically wrong with it. So they get a chance to learn that. Because they're going to do that the rest of their lives. Just because something's published does not mean it's necessarily good. And when I say here, build a team, I'm talking about an administrative team here, not a clinical team. How do you put the people you want around you in all these different areas, and how do you look at it? We evaluated every program we had, every year. We evaluated our clinical programs. We evaluated our residency programs, our research programs. What are our strengths? What are our weaknesses? What do we need? You know, research, if you're going to different core areas, and you're not doing very well in one, maybe it's time to take it down and go into another. These are some of the tougher decisions that a chair has to make. Productivity. Once again, how do you analyze this? You know, sometimes you can't change things. I told the residents when I first got to New Jersey, the worst teachers I had were at the VA. Now they're my best teachers. I had one teacher at the VA that she got to, at the end of each rotation, evaluate her residents. They all got the same score. They all got 9s. They were all perfect, even if they're the first rotation the first year. And I said, what do you do that? She said, well, I felt if I ranked the residents well, they would rank me well. Pretty pathetic, actually. So I think you need to be able to evaluate the productivity. You need to establish goals, establish standards. I mean, I have an individual on my university faculty, I probably shouldn't say this, but I'm going to, that writes about 400 articles a year. I mean, he has a CV that's unbelievable. He won't apply for grants and stuff. And so I put down this year you have to apply for a grant. So at the end of when we have our annual evaluation, under academic performance, I'd write unsatisfactory. I'd check. He went crazy. I said, well, that's the only goal we had. I don't care if you publish a book, and I don't care if you publish 3 papers. We were supposed to do this other. But he had agreed to that ahead of time, then he just didn't want to do it. He didn't think we'd ever get to that point. We're still good friends. So I think you need to set individual expectations, program, and department goals. And you need to evaluate them. Promotions. Key, some people don't care. Some people care a lot. I think you need to know your school, your pathways, and the criteria. Because we had 3 different pathways. We had what I would call the straight, old-fashioned, tenured pathway. We had an educator pathway, which was mainly doing educational things. And we had a clinical pathway mainly for doctors that were in private practice or doctors who were in Kessler who only really took care of patients. So we had 3 different programs. And we had criteria for each, etc. We had mentors set up to help people. And once again, If you're a more senior person, the number of people you had was no more than 2. And we set the expectations. And we wanted to promote people. I wanted to have a lot of full professors, etc. It makes you look a lot stronger within the medical school if you have a faculty that's big and established. Politics. Ha, 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 ha. Know the culture of your institution and its history. Not just what's said, but what's really happened. And as I tell everybody, no matter what committees you're on, go prepared. Know the agenda. Add things to the agenda if you think they're important. Read the material. I used to be called the dedicated reader for any board I was on because I read everything. I used to laugh at when people would come with their computers and I'd stick them on and start flipping around and something would come and I'd say, well, what do you think about this? They had no clue what that was because they hadn't read it and they hadn't printed it out, etc. We had an administrator who won't be named, and especially that won't be named, on a board that won't be named, that snuck in a huge raise for herself that nobody caught but me. She'd have got away with it because they didn't read anything. They plugged in their computer and acted like they were doing something. Next thing I think is really important. I listen to what you say, but I pay a hell of a lot more to what you do. What you do is much more important to me than what you say. If you talk the greatest game in the world, but don't follow through, it doesn't mean much to me anymore. Okay? I told the House staff earlier that I always, I spend a lot of time around here in our different specialties. And so when somebody told me something and did the opposite or didn't tell me the truth, I always remembered them. And I had, in my back of my mind, I would say, don't get angry, just get even. That didn't go over well with a lot of people. Okay? One thing, boards and appropriate agendas. Put things on the agenda that you think are important and needs to be talked about. I just told everybody, I think, one of the things we don't do well is position papers of our organizations. Look at the opiate epidemic going along. We prescribe a lot of opiates to a lot of patients with chronic pain, non-cancerous. Do we have any guidelines? Do we have any position on it? Are we known for it? You go to the pain societies, they have position papers out there. We don't have any that I know of. I think it's a mistake. Well, if you want to be relevant as a specialty, you have to take positions. Some attributes for a great department chairman or dean. You have to be honest, and you have to have integrity. You have to be consistent. And you have to be able to say no. The best person you have in your department, if he or she keeps asking you for more and more and more, sometime you have to say, that's it. Can't give you everything. So I think that's the hardest thing for a department chair to do, but one of the most important things to do. How can you influence without dominating? Once again, I think the planning process gives the department a vision. It gives them steps and goals, but you can modify that depending on the circumstances, because you have to be a good strategist. I think it's interesting that I've talked to many of my younger faculty and people that have become now department chairs. I said, you have to have a passion for work. And they would say, we worked so hard in the University Kessler system, but we always saw you there working harder. And I made a big example, and it was very important. You have to be able to take risk, and we talked about that before. Communication, the listening, whatever. And I think you need to set up quality improvement programs in all your areas. And I just have education down here, but you can set the whole things up in research, you can set the whole things up in patient care. And I think, and this is at the end, but I think one of the things that you have to remember if you take a leadership position is that oftentimes you give up your own creativity for that institution or that program's creativity. There will become a time again when you can set up your own research program, et cetera, down the line. I think one of the most frustrating things when I moved to New Jersey was I had things that I wanted to do, or things I wanted to write, and I didn't have time to do it, and all of a sudden you see it in print. Well, most ideas are not just done by one person. Lots of people get them. Lots of people write. Some people never write. So the reason that I took a while to get to New Jersey is I was working on the first edition of the textbook. I wanted it done before I moved there because I knew the first year or whatever, I would have no chance of getting that done. So that was a priority to get done before I got there. So with that, I want to thank you very much for inviting me. I hope this has been helpful to you. I hope you've enjoyed it. It's my pleasure to be the first Dennis Matthews lecturer in this thing. I consider Dennis an amazing clinician. I think he's a great academician. I think he's a good friend, and he got me in trouble one time here when we were by the Broadmoor. And my wife and I were sitting there. He runs up with his red Porsche. My wife says, "I want that." To this day, she reminds me of that, and she does not have it. So anyway, thank you very much, and thank you, Dennis, for everything you've done. Oh.
So we should, why don't you, we want Bill, the Twitter. We need a Twitter picture. Huh?
Thank you. Thank you. Well, thank you very much, Dennis.
Dr. DeLisa will be around, so if you want to ask him some questions and stuff, he's a great resource for you. Thanks.
Thank you.
So I was I went to visit Walter's program.